The eviction notice felt like ice in Denise Thompson's trembling hands as she stood on the front porch of the only home her daughters had ever known. The paper shook not from the October wind whipping through Detroit's east side, but from the rage and terror fighting for space in her chest. Behind her, 8-year-old Ruby pressed her face against the window while 6-year-old Pearl played with her dolls, both girls unaware that their world was about to collapse. 30 days, Denise whispered to herself, reading the bold letters for the 5th time. 30 days to find somewhere else to go. 30 days to figure out how to rebuild a life that seemed determined to crumble no matter how hard she fought to hold it together. The sound of a car door slamming made her look up. Her heart sank as she watched her mother-in-law, Beatrice Thompson, march up the cracked sidewalk with that familiar look of disgust painted across her face. Even after 3 years of being widowed, even after raising 2 beautiful granddaughters mostly alone, Denise still had to face this woman's judgment. "I see you got the notice," Beatrice said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. She didn't even glance at the house where her own granddaughters lived. "Maybe now you'll finally understand that some things just aren't meant to be." Denise felt something cold settle in her stomach. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Beatrice stepped closer, her expensive purse clutched tight against her chest like armor, "that maybe it's time you accepted that you can't do this alone. 2 girls, no husband, no steady job that pays enough to matter. It's not working, Denise. Anyone with eyes can see that. Those are your granddaughters in there?" Denise's voice came out steadier than she felt. "Ruby and Pearl are family. They're all the family I have left of Michael." Beatrice's face hardened. "If my son had lived, he would have had sons. Real heirs. Not." She waved her hand dismissively toward the house. "This." The words hit Denise like a physical blow. She had heard this poison before, but never so directly. Never with such cold calculation. Beatrice had always made it clear that she blamed Denise for not giving her son the boys he deserved, as if gender was something Denise could control, as if her daughters were somehow less valuable because they weren't male. "Get out," Denise heard herself say. "Excuse me?" "I said get out. Get off my porch, get out of our lives, and don't you ever speak about my daughters like that again." Beatrice smiled, and it was the cruelest expression Denise had ever seen. "Your porch? According to that paper in your hand, it's not your porch much longer. And when you're sleeping in your car with those girls, don't come crying to me. I offered to help, but only if you were willing to be reasonable." "What kind of help?" "The kind that understands some people just aren't cut out to be parents. There are good families out there, Denise. Families with money and stability and 2 parents. Families who could give Ruby and Pearl the life they deserve." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Denise grabbed the porch railing to keep from falling. "You're talking about giving away my children. I'm talking about doing what's best for them instead of what makes you feel good about yourself. They're my daughters. And they deserve better than this." Beatrice gestured at the small house with its peeling paint and overgrown front yard. "Look at yourself, Denise. Really look. When's the last time you bought yourself new clothes? When's the last time those girls had a proper meal that didn't come from a box? You're drowning and you're taking them down with you." Inside the house, Denise could hear Ruby reading a story to Pearl, their voices mixing together in the sweet harmony that had gotten her through every dark night since Michael died. They were happy. Despite everything, despite the money problems and the too small house and the refrigerator that barely worked, they were happy together. "I love my girls," Denise said quietly. "Love doesn't pay rent," Beatrice shot back. "Love doesn't put food on the table or clothes on their backs or books in their hands. And it certainly doesn't change the fact that you've failed to give them the stability they need." The front door opened behind them. Ruby stepped out, all long legs and curious brown eyes, looking so much like her father that it took Denise's breath away. "Mama? What's wrong? You look sad." Denise quickly folded the eviction notice and forced a smile. "Nothing's wrong, baby. Grandma Beatrice was just leaving." Beatrice looked at Ruby with an expression Denise couldn't quite read. For just a moment, something soft flickered across the older woman's face. But then it hardened again. "Think about what I said, Denise. Think real hard. Because in 30 days, when you're standing on the street with nowhere to go, I might not be feeling so generous." She turned and walked back to her car without another word, leaving Denise standing there with her daughter's small hand slipped into hers and her entire world falling apart around her. "Mama, why does Grandma Beatrice always look so angry when she sees us?" The question cut straight to Denise's heart. How do you explain to an 8-year-old that some people see girls as disappointments? How do you tell a child that her own grandmother wishes she had never been born? "Some people have forgotten how to see the good things right in front of them," Denise said finally, kneeling down to look Ruby in the eye. But that's their problem, not yours. You and Pearl are the best things that ever happened to me, and don't you ever forget that. Ruby smiled, but Denise could see the worry still lingering in her daughter's eyes. Kids always knew more than adults thought they did. Are we going to be okay, Mama? It was the question Denise had been asking herself every night for months. The question that followed her to work at the grocery store where she barely made enough to cover utilities, much less rent. The question that haunted her as she counted and recounted the bills, trying to make math work that simply wouldn't work. But looking at Ruby's face, so trusting, so full of faith in her mother's ability to fix whatever was broken, Denise felt something fierce and protective rise up in her chest. Yes, baby. We're going to be more than okay. Mama's going to figure this out. Ruby hugged her tight, and over her daughter's shoulder, Denise watched Beatrice's car disappear around the corner. 30 days. Somehow, in 30 days she had to prove that love could be enough. That being a mother to daughters was something to be proud of, not ashamed of. She just had no idea how. That night, after the girls were asleep, Denise sat at her kitchen table with a calculator, a stack of bills, and a notebook filled with job listings she'd torn from the newspaper. No matter how she ran the numbers, they didn't add up. Even if she found a second job, even if she worked 7 days a week, she couldn't make enough money to afford a new apartment and still have time to be the mother Ruby and Pearl needed. The eviction notice lay beside her, and for one terrible moment, she let herself imagine what Beatrice had suggested. Maybe there were families out there who could give her daughters things she never could. Maybe Ruby and Pearl would be better off with parents who had college degrees and savings accounts and houses in safe neighborhoods. But then she heard Pearl talking in her sleep from the bedroom they shared, something about butterflies and ice cream, and the thought crumbled to dust. Those were her babies. She had carried them, birthed them, stayed up with them through every fever and nightmare and scraped knee. She had taught them their letters and numbers, had shown them how to braid their hair and tie their shoes and say their prayers. She was their mother, not because some paper said so, but because every cell in her body loved them with a fierce protectiveness that would have scared her if she'd stopped to think about it. Somehow she would find a way. She had to. The next morning brought Mrs. Geneva Hayes to Denise's front door with a covered dish and the kind of knowing look that meant she'd heard about the eviction notice. Mrs. Hayes lived 3 houses down and had been watching over the neighborhood kids for as long as anyone could remember. She was the kind of woman who knew everyone's business but only shared it when sharing might help. "Morning, honey," she said, stepping into the small living room where Pearl was building towers with blocks while Ruby got ready for school. "Brought you some of that cornbread Pearl likes." "Mrs. Hayes, you don't have to." "Hush now. Sit yourself down and talk to me." There was something in the older woman's voice that made Denise obey without thinking. Mrs. Hayes had raised 4 children of her own and helped raise half the kids in the neighborhood. When she used that tone, even grown folks listened. "Ruby, baby, walk yourself to school this morning," Mrs. Hayes called toward the back of the house. "Take your time and be safe." "Yes, ma'am." Ruby's voice came back, bright and cheerful. Pearl looked up from her blocks. "Miss Geneva, are you going to eat cornbread with us?" "I might just do that, sugar." "Why don't you go brush your teeth so your mama and I can talk grown-up talk for a minute?" When Pearl had skipped off to the bathroom, Mrs. Hayes settled her considerable frame into the worn armchair and fixed Denise with a steady look. "So, 30 days. How did you?" "Baby, I've been living on this street for 43 years. I see everything that matters. Question is, what are you planning to do about it?" Denise felt tears threaten for the first time since yesterday. Something about Mrs. Hayes's matter-of-fact kindness made it safe to fall apart a little. "I don't know. I've been looking for a second job, but anything that pays enough would mean working nights or weekends, and I can't leave the girls alone. Daycare costs more than I'd make. And even if I could make it work, I still don't have first month's rent and deposit for a new place. What about family?" Denise thought about Beatrice's cold smile, her talk of reasonable solutions. She thought about her own parents, dead since she was 22, and Michael's extended family who had never quite warmed to her anyway. "Beatrice wants me to give up the girls." Mrs. Hayes's expression didn't change, but something dangerous flickered in her eyes. "Come again?" "She says I can't provide for them properly. That they'd be better off with a family that has more money, more stability," she said. Denise swallowed hard. She said if Michael had lived, he would have had sons instead. The silence that followed was so complete that Denise could hear the clock ticking on the mantel and Pearl humming in the bathroom. "Geneva Hayes," Mrs. Hayes said finally, "has been attending Greater Mount Calvary Baptist Church for 68 years. I have sung in the choir, served on the Mother's Board, and helped organize more church dinners than I can count. But if that woman walked into my house right now suggesting I help her steal babies from their mama, I would forget every bit of my Christian upbringing and show her the business end of my wooden spoon. Despite everything, Denise felt a small smile tug at her lips. Those are your children, Mrs. Hayes continued, her voice gaining strength. God blessed you with two beautiful, healthy, smart little girls, and anyone who thinks girls are less of a blessing than boys has clearly never met Ruby and Pearl Thompson. Now we're going to figure this out, but we're going to do it the right way. Honey, I didn't raise 4 kids and help raise 20 more just to sit back and watch a good mother lose her babies because she's hit a rough patch. You think you're the first woman in this neighborhood to face an eviction notice? You think you're the first single mama to wonder how she's going to make it work? Mrs. Hayes reached into her purse and pulled out a small notebook, already filled with her neat handwriting. First thing, you're going to talk to Rochelle Davis down at the community center. She runs programs for single mothers, helps with job placement, sometimes has emergency funds for housing deposits. Second thing, we're going to get you signed up for the food assistance program so you can stop choosing between groceries and utilities. Mrs. Hayes, I appreciate this, but I don't want charity. It's not charity when you pay taxes, and those programs exist to help working families get back on their feet. It's using the system the way it was designed to be used. Pride is a luxury you can't afford right now, baby. Your job is to keep your family together, not to prove you can do everything alone. Pearl came running back into the room, her face shining clean and her hair bouncing in the ponytails Denise had braided the night before. Miss Geneva, are you staying for breakfast? I sure am, sugar. And I brought enough cornbread for everyone. As they ate together, Pearl chattering about her upcoming school play, Mrs. Hayes asking all the right questions, Denise felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Oh, not the desperate kind that comes from wishing things would somehow get better, but the solid kind that comes from having a plan and people to help carry it out. After breakfast, Mrs. Hayes walked with them to Pearl's kindergarten class, then continued on to the community center with Denise. The building was older but well-maintained, with bright murals painted on the walls and the sound of children's laughter coming from somewhere deeper inside. Rochelle Davis turned out to be a woman about Denise's age with natural hair twisted into an elaborate updo and the kind of energy that made everything seem possible. Her office walls were covered with photos, graduation ceremonies, job training programs, families at picnics and celebrations. Mrs. Hayes tells me you're facing an eviction, Rochelle said, settling behind her desk with a thick folder. Tell me about your situation. Denise found herself talking more openly than she had in months. About Michael's death 3 years ago, about the life insurance money that had seemed like so much until it ran out. About working at the grocery store and barely making ends meet, about Beatrice's pressure to give up the girls. Rochelle listened without judgment, taking notes and asking practical questions about income and expenses and timeline. Here's what I can do, she said when Denise finished. We have an emergency housing fund that can cover a security deposit, and I know several landlords who work with our program, decent places in safe neighborhoods with reasonable rent. But you're going to need to increase your income. I've been looking for a second job, but with child care. What did you do before you had kids? I worked for an insurance company. Customer service, some light bookkeeping. But that was 8 years ago, and I don't have recent experience with computers. We can fix that. Rochelle pulled out another folder. I run a job skills program 3 evenings a week. Computer training, resume writing, interview preparation. We provide child care during the classes, and I have connections with several local businesses that need office workers. Denise stared at the application forms Rochelle placed in front of her. It seemed almost too good to be true. There's no catch, Rochelle said, reading her expression. This is what we do. We help working mothers build better lives for their families. But I need you to commit to the full program, 12 weeks, 3 nights a week. It's going to be hard work on top of your current job, and there will be times when you want to quit. But if you stick with it, I can almost guarantee you'll have better job options by the time your training is complete. What about the eviction? 30 days isn't enough time. Let me make some calls. I might be able to help you negotiate a payment plan with your current landlord, buy you some extra time. And if not, we'll find you a new place. The important thing is that you and the girls stay together. Mrs. Hayes reached over and squeezed Denise's hand. What did I tell you? Angels everywhere if you know how to look for them. That evening, after the girls were in bed, Denise sat at her kitchen table again. But this time, instead of a stack of unpayable bills, she had application forms and program schedules and a list of phone numbers. She had a plan that stretched beyond the next 30 days, beyond simple survival. For the first time since Michael died, she was thinking about building something instead of just trying to keep what she had from falling apart. Ruby appeared in the kitchen doorway in her pajamas, rubbing sleepy eyes. "Mama? You look different." "Different how?" "Happy different. Like when you used to sing while you made breakfast." Denise pulled her oldest daughter onto her lap, breathing in the scent of her hair and the sweetness of childhood that somehow survived even in the hardest times. "Maybe I am a little happy, baby. I think things are going to start getting better for us." "Because of Miss Geneva?" "Because of Miss Geneva, and because your mama remembers how to fight for what matters most." Ruby snuggled closer. "What matters most?" "You and Pearl. Always you and Pearl." 6 weeks into the job training program, Denise was beginning to remember who she used to be before grief and struggle had worn her down to nothing but survival instincts. 3 nights a week, she dropped Ruby and Pearl off at the community center's child care program and spent 4 hours learning computer skills, practicing interview techniques, and rebuilding confidence she'd forgotten she ever had. Rochelle had been true to her word about the housing situation. After several tense phone calls and a payment plan that stretched Denise's budget to its absolute limit, they'd managed to stay in the house through the winter. It wasn't a permanent solution, but it bought them time for Denise to complete her training, time to save money for a proper move, time for the girls to finish out their school year without disruption. Pearl had adjusted to the new routine with the flexibility that seemed to come naturally to 6-year-olds. She loved the child care program, especially the art projects and story time. But Ruby, always more sensitive to adult emotions, had been asking questions. "Mama, why do you have to go to school at night? You already know how to read and write and do math." They were walking home from the community center on a cold February evening, Pearl skipping ahead while Ruby stayed close to Denise's side. "Remember how Daddy used to say that learning never stops?" Denise said, pulling Ruby's coat tighter around her thin shoulders. "Well, I'm learning new things so I can get a better job. A job that pays enough for us to have a bigger place to live, maybe even a house with a backyard where you and Pearl can play." "Will we have to leave our neighborhood?" The question caught Denise off guard. She'd been so focused on getting to somewhere better that she hadn't considered what they'd be leaving behind. This neighborhood was far from perfect, too much crime, too many empty lots, too many broken dreams, but it was also where Mrs. Hayes made cornbread and where the corner store owner always asked about the girls' grades and where everybody looked out for each other's children. "Would that make you sad?" Ruby thought about it seriously, the way she approached everything. "A little bit. But mostly I just want us to stay together. All 3 of us. That's never going to change, baby. Not ever." But even as she said it, Denise felt a familiar flutter of anxiety. Beatrice had been surprisingly quiet since their confrontation on the porch, but Denise knew that didn't mean she'd given up. If anything, the silence felt more ominous than the direct threats had. At home, while the girls got ready for bed, Denise reviewed her notes from that evening's class. They'd practiced mock interviews, and for the first time, she'd felt confident answering questions about her skills and experience. Rochelle had arranged for several local businesses to visit next week's class, and there was talk of actual job interviews for the participants who were ready. The phone rang just as she was closing her notebook. "Denise? It's Geneva Hayes. You need to get down here right now." The urgency in Mrs. Hayes's voice made Denise's blood run cold. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" "I'm fine, but we need to talk. And you need to see something. Bring the girls if you have to, but come now." Denise bundled Ruby and Pearl into their coats, her mind racing through every possible disaster. Had something happened to Mrs. Hayes? Had someone broken into her house? But when they reached the older woman's front porch, Mrs. Hayes looked perfectly fine. Angry but fine. "Girls, go on into the kitchen," she said, ushering them inside. "I made some hot chocolate and there are cookies in the jar on the counter." When they were alone in the living room, Mrs. Hayes pulled out an envelope that had clearly been opened and read. "This came to my house by mistake today. Same street number as yours but wrong street name. I was going to just walk it over, but then I saw who it was from." Denise took the envelope with shaking hands. The return address made her stomach drop. Law Offices of Henderson and Associates. "Read it," Mrs. Hayes said grimly. The letter was formal and cold, full of legal language that Denise had to read twice to understand. But the basic message was clear enough. Beatrice Thompson was petitioning for custody of Ruby and Pearl Thompson on the grounds that their mother was unable to provide adequate care and housing. "She can't do this," Denise whispered. "She can and she is. Question is, what are you going to do about it?" Denise read the letter again, this time focusing on the specific accusations. Inadequate housing. Financial instability. Failure to provide consistent educational support. Each phrase felt like a physical blow. Some of this stuff, Mrs. Hayes, some of this is true. The house is too small, and there have been times when the girls had to miss school because I couldn't afford the gas to drive them. And you've been working your behind off to fix every one of those problems. You think the judge is going to care more about where you've been or where you're going? From the kitchen came the sound of Ruby and Pearl's laughter, probably over something silly Pearl had said while drinking hot chocolate. The sound of children who felt safe and loved and completely unaware that their entire world was under attack. I need a lawyer. Yes, you do. But first, you need to understand something. Mrs. Hayes sat forward, her expression fierce. That woman is not doing this because she loves those girls. If she loved them, she would be helping you succeed, not trying to tear your family apart. This is about control, and it's about making sure she gets her way even if it destroys everyone else in the process. But what if she's right? What if I can't give them what they need? Denise Thompson, you look at me right now. The command in Mrs. Hayes's voice made Denise lift her head. I have been watching mothers raise children in this neighborhood for over 40 years. I have seen women with nothing but love and determination raise kids who became doctors and teachers and business owners. I have also seen women with money and big houses and fancy cars raise children who ended up lost and angry and broken. You know what makes the difference? Denise shook her head. Whether those children know deep in their bones that they are wanted and valued and loved exactly as they are. Ruby and Pearl Thompson know that. Anyone who spends 5 minutes with them can see that. They are confident, kind, smart little girls who adore their mama and trust her completely. That doesn't happen by accident. Denise felt tears starting, but for once they weren't tears of despair. Now, Mrs. Hayes continued, we're going to fight this thing and we're going to win. But first, you need to call Rochelle and see if she knows any family lawyers who work with people in our situation. And then you need to document everything, every step you've taken to improve your situation, every program you've joined, every goal you've set and met. What if it's not enough? Then we'll make it enough. You're not in this alone anymore, remember? The next morning, Denise called in sick to work and spent the day making phone calls and gathering documents. Rochelle knew a lawyer who specialized in family cases and who had experience fighting what she called vindictive custody grabs. Dr. Simone Carter, the pediatrician who had been treating the girls since they were babies, agreed to write a letter documenting their health and development. The director of Ruby's school provided records showing that despite some attendance issues earlier in the year, both girls were performing well academically and socially. By evening, Denise had assembled a thick folder of evidence. Job training certificates, letters of recommendation, bank records showing steady improvement in her financial situation, and documentation of every resource she was using to better their lives. But the most important evidence couldn't be captured on paper. It was in the way Pearl ran to her every evening when she picked them up from after-school care. It was in Ruby's trust that Mama would always find a way to fix whatever was broken. It was in the bedtime stories and the homemade Halloween costumes and the patience she'd shown through every tantrum and growing pain. It was in the simple, undeniable fact that Ruby and Pearl Thompson were thriving under their mother's care. 3 days later, she met with Sarah Mitchell, the family lawyer Rochelle had recommended. Sarah was a small woman with silver hair and kind eyes who listened to the whole story without interruption. This is going to be hard, she said when Denise finished. Your mother-in-law has money and social standing, and unfortunately, family courts sometimes equate financial resources with parenting ability. But we have several things working in our favor. Like what? Like the fact that she waited 3 years to express concerns about your parenting, which suggests this isn't really about the children's welfare. Like your documented efforts to improve your situation. And like the simple fact that removing children from a loving home is traumatic, and courts prefer to keep families together when possible. Sarah leaned forward, her expression serious but encouraging. Most importantly, we have time. Family court moves slowly and you're already making progress. If you can complete your job training program, secure better employment, and maybe find more stable housing, we'll have a strong case that you're addressing any legitimate concerns about stability. How long do we have? Probably 6 months before we go to court. Maybe more. 6 months. It sounded like forever and no time at all. That night, after the girls were asleep, Denise sat at her kitchen table and made a new kind of list. Not bills to pay or problems to solve, but goals to reach and dreams to achieve. Better job. Better housing. Continued education for herself. College funds for Ruby and Pearl. For the first time since Michael died, she was planning for a future instead of just surviving the present. and she was going to win. The court date arrived on an unseasonably warm day in early September, 8 months after Beatrice had first threatened to take the girls. In those 8 months, Denise had completed her job training program, found a position as an administrative assistant at a dental practice that paid almost twice what she'd made at the grocery store, and moved Ruby and Pearl into a small but comfortable 2-bedroom apartment in a safer neighborhood. But none of those victories had prepared her for walking into that courtroom and seeing Beatrice Thompson sitting at the plaintiff's table in her best suit, flanked by 2 expensive lawyers who looked like they charged more per hour than Denise made in a week. Ruby and Pearl were not in the courtroom. Sarah had arranged for them to spend the day with Mrs. Hayes, but their presence felt heavy in the air anyway. Everything Denise had worked for, everything she had built, came down to the next few hours. "Remember," Sarah whispered as they took their seats, "tell the truth, answer only what you're asked, and don't let them make you angry. They're going to try to paint you as unstable, so stay calm no matter what they throw at you." Judge Patricia Williams was a black woman about Mrs. Hayes' age, with steel-gray hair and eyes that seemed to see everything. Denise felt a small flutter of hope. Surely a woman who looked like she understood struggle would see the truth of this situation. Beatrice's lawyer stood first, a thin white man who spoke in the kind of polished tones that suggested he'd never missed a meal or worried about making rent. "Your Honor, this case is about 2 young children who deserve stability and security. The respondent, while well-meaning, has consistently failed to provide adequate housing, financial security, or educational support for Ruby and Pearl Thompson. My client, Mrs. Beatrice Thompson, is prepared to offer these children a stable home environment with educational opportunities and financial resources their mothers simply cannot match." He painted a picture of Denise that was technically accurate but felt like describing a person she'd never met. Yes, there had been times when money was tight. Yes, the girls had sometimes missed school when Denise couldn't afford gas or when Pearl was sick and daycare wasn't an option. Yes, they'd lived in less than ideal housing. But he made it sound like neglect instead of the reality of working-class single motherhood. He made it sound like the girls were suffering instead of thriving. When it was Sarah's turn, she stood with quiet confidence. "Your Honor, this case is not about what Mrs. Thompson couldn't provide in the past, but about what she has provided consistently throughout her daughters' lives. Love, stability, and unwavering commitment to their well-being. In the 18 months since Mrs. Beatrice Thompson first expressed concerns, Ms. Denise Thompson has completed job training, secured better employment, moved to improved housing, and continued to raise 2 happy, healthy, well-adjusted children." Sarah called witness after witness. Dr. Simone Carter testified about the girls' excellent health and normal development. Ruby's 3rd-grade teacher spoke about her academic progress and social adjustment. Rochelle Davis described Denise's dedication to self-improvement and her active participation in community support programs. Mrs. Hayes took the stand wearing her best dress and the kind of dignity that comes from a lifetime of facing down challenges with grace. "I have known Denise Thompson for 3 years," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the courtroom. "I have watched her bury her husband, struggle with grief and financial hardship, and work harder than any person should have to work to keep her family together. But most importantly, I have watched Ruby and Pearl Thompson grow into confident, loving, intelligent little girls who know beyond any doubt that they are treasured by their mother." "Mrs. Hayes," Beatrice's lawyer said during cross-examination, "you've admitted that there were times when these children missed school, times when their basic needs weren't adequately met. Doesn't love require more than good intentions?" Mrs. Hayes fixed him with a look that could have melted steel. "Young man, I have raised 4 children and helped raise about 20 more in my neighborhood. I know the difference between a parent who is struggling and a parent who is failing. Denise Thompson has never failed those girls, not for one single day. She has faced challenges that would have broken many people, and she has met every one of those challenges with more strength and grace than anyone should have to show." When Denise took the stand, her hands were shaking but her voice was steady. "I love my daughters," she said simply. "Everything I have done for the past 3 years has been about giving them the best life I possibly can. Have I made mistakes? Yes. Have there been times when I couldn't give them everything I wanted to give them? Absolutely. But Ruby and Pearl have never doubted that they are loved, wanted, and valued exactly as they are." Beatrice's lawyer tried to rattle her, asking pointed questions about missed school days and unpaid bills and the eviction notice that had started this whole nightmare. But for every criticism, Denise had an answer that showed not failure, but a mother doing everything possible to protect and provide for her children. "Mrs. Thompson," he said finally, "can you honestly say that your daughters wouldn't have more opportunities, more stability, more security in my client's care?" It was the question Denise had been dreading, the one that went straight to the heart of every doubt she'd ever had about her ability to be enough. "I can honestly say," she replied, looking directly at Beatrice for the first time all day, "that my daughters would not have more love. They would not feel more wanted or more valued or more secure in who they are as people. Material things are important, but they are not the most important thing. Ruby and Pearl need to know that they matter not because of what someone can buy them, but because of who they are. And if my client could provide both love and material advantages?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Denise thought about Beatrice's face when she talked about Michael deserving sons instead of daughters. She thought about the cold calculation in her voice when she'd suggested that girls were somehow less valuable than boys. "Your Honor," Denise said, turning to address Judge Williams directly, "love isn't something you can just decide to provide. It's something that grows from knowing a person, from being there through their fears and their joys, from understanding what makes them laugh and what comforts them when they cry. Mrs. Beatrice Thompson has never shown interest in knowing my daughters as individuals. She has made it clear that she sees them as disappointments because they aren't the grandsons she wanted." A murmur went through the courtroom. Beatrice's face flushed red, and one of her lawyers placed a restraining hand on her arm. "That's a serious accusation," the opposing counsel said. "It's not an accusation. It's a fact that Mrs. Thompson herself stated to me directly." When court recessed for lunch, Denise felt drained but oddly hopeful. Sarah seemed pleased with how the morning had gone. "The judge is asking good questions," she said as they sat in the courthouse cafeteria. "And Beatrice's team isn't presenting as strong a case as they probably expected. The problem with trying to prove someone is an unfit mother when they clearly aren't is that the evidence doesn't support your argument." But Denise's hope dimmed when court resumed and Beatrice took the stand. Dressed in an elegant navy suit with her silver hair perfectly styled, Beatrice Thompson looked every inch the respectable grandmother. Her voice shook with what sounded like genuine emotion as she described her concern for her granddaughter's welfare. "I have watched these children struggle," she said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "I have seen them wearing clothes that don't fit properly, seen them miss school because their mother couldn't afford gas for the car. I have offered to help financially, but Denise has refused my assistance out of pride." It was masterfully done, every word technically true, but twisted to paint Denise as stubborn and Beatrice as a concerned grandmother whose only crime was caring too much. "Mrs. Thompson," Sarah said during cross-examination, "when exactly did you first express concern about these children's welfare?" I've been concerned for some time. But when did you first take action to address these concerns?" Beatrice shifted uncomfortably. "After the eviction notice. It became clear that Denise couldn't provide stable housing. So for 3 years after your son's death, while Miss Thompson was grieving and struggling as a single mother, you offered no support, no assistance, no help of any kind?" "I offered help. She refused it." "What kind of help did you offer?" Another uncomfortable pause. "Financial assistance. Guidance. Did you ever offer to babysit so she could work more hours? Did you ever bring groceries when money was tight? Did you ever simply ask what she needed and how you could help?" That's not. I felt it was important for her to learn independence." Sarah moved closer to the witness stand. "Mrs. Thompson, isn't it true that you told Miss Thompson that if her deceased husband had lived, he would have had sons instead of daughters?" The courtroom went completely silent. Beatrice's face went pale, then red again. "I may have, in a moment of frustration. I didn't mean." "Isn't it also true that you suggested Miss Thompson should consider placing Ruby and Pearl with other families because she had failed to give them the stability they need? Those children deserve better than." "Please answer the question. Did you or did you not suggest that these children would be better off with other families?" Beatrice's composure finally cracked. "Yes, because it's true. Denise has never been able to provide for them properly. She's stubborn and prideful and she's putting her own feelings ahead of what's best for those girls." The outburst hung in the air like smoke. Judge Williams made a note, her expression unreadable. When closing arguments began, Beatrice's lawyer did his best to recover from his client's emotional display, focusing again on financial stability and educational opportunities. But Sarah's closing was devastating in its simplicity. "Your Honor, this case comes down to one fundamental question. What is in the best interests of Ruby and Pearl Thompson? The evidence shows 2 children who are healthy, happy, well-adjusted, and deeply loved by their mother. The evidence shows a mother who has overcome tremendous obstacles to provide stability and security for her family. Mrs. Beatrice Thompson may be able to offer material advantages, but she has also made it clear that she values these children less because they are girls rather than boys. She has shown no interest in their individual personalities, their needs, their dreams. She has offered no support to help them thrive in their current home, choosing instead to pursue a destructive legal battle that serves no one's interests except her own. The law is clear. Children should remain with loving, capable parents unless there is evidence of abuse or neglect. There is no such evidence here. There is only a grandmother who has decided that money matters more than love, and a mother who has proven again and again that she will move mountains to protect and provide for her children. Judge Williams called for a 30-minute recess before rendering her decision. Those 30 minutes felt like 30 hours. When court reconvened, the judge's expression was serious but not unkind. This court has reviewed all evidence presented and has considered the testimony of all witnesses. The petitioner, Mrs. Beatrice Thompson, has failed to demonstrate that the current living situation poses any immediate threat to the welfare of Ruby and Pearl Thompson. While the respondent, Ms. Denise Thompson, has faced financial challenges, the evidence clearly shows that she has taken significant steps to address those challenges and has consistently provided a loving, stable home environment for her daughters. Furthermore, this court is troubled by testimony suggesting that the petitioner's motivation may be based in part on disappointment over the gender of these children. The best interests of children are never served by adults who view them as somehow deficient because of characteristics beyond their control. The petition for custody is denied. Ruby and Pearl Thompson will remain in the care of their mother, Ms. Denise Thompson. The gavel came down with a finality that made Denise's knees buckle with relief. Sarah caught her arm, grinning widely. "We won," she whispered. "It's over. They're yours and they're safe." 2 years after the custody battle, Denise stood in the kitchen of their new house, not an apartment, but an actual house with 3 bedrooms and a backyard where Ruby and Pearl could play, preparing Sunday dinner for what had become their extended family. Mrs. Hayes arrived first, as always, carrying a covered dish and wearing the kind of smile that meant she had good news to share. At 70, she moved a little slower than she used to, but her sharp eyes and sharper tongue were as formidable as ever. "Rochelle's running a few minutes behind," she announced, settling into what everyone now considered her chair at the kitchen table. "She's bringing someone she wants y'all to meet." "Someone new for the program?" Denise asked, stirring the pot of greens that Mrs. Hayes had taught her to season properly. "Someone who graduated from the program 5 years ago and just opened her own accounting business. Rochelle thought Ruby might like to meet her, seeing as how your oldest has been talking about wanting to help people with their money problems." Denise smiled, thinking about Ruby's latest career aspiration. At 11, she changed her mind about what she wanted to be when she grew up at least once a month, but she always gravitated toward jobs that involved helping people solve problems. Teacher, doctor, lawyer, accountant, the specific profession didn't matter as much as the underlying desire to make things better for others. Pearl, now 9, burst through the back door with grass stains on her knees and dirt under her fingernails, evidence of another afternoon spent exploring every corner of their small backyard. "Mama. Miss Geneva. Come see what I found." She led them outside to the vegetable garden they'd planted together last spring. Hidden among the tomato plants was a small bird's nest, perfectly woven and containing 3 tiny blue eggs. "Can we keep them? Can we watch them hatch?" "We can watch," Denise said, "but we have to be very careful not to disturb them. Baby birds need their mama to take care of them, just like you needed me when you were little." Pearl nodded seriously, already planning how she would check on the nest every day without getting too close. The sound of car doors slamming announced the arrival of Rochelle and her guest, a young woman about Denise's age with a bright smile and a confidence that reminded Denise of her own journey from desperation to stability. "This is Monica Williams," Rochelle said, making introductions. "Monica, meet the Thompson family I've been telling you about." Over dinner, Monica shared her story. Single mother of twin boys, went through Rochelle's program when she was facing eviction, now running a successful practice and giving back to the community by offering free tax preparation services to low-income families. "The thing is," Monica said, addressing Ruby directly, "I almost gave up halfway through the program. It was so hard working all day, going to class at night, trying to be a good mother to my boys. But Ms. Rochelle wouldn't let me quit." "What made it worth it?" Ruby asked, hanging on every word. "The same thing that made it worth it for your mama. Knowing that my boys would see me fight for something better instead of just accepting whatever life handed me. Now they're both on honor roll and they tell people their mama is a business owner. That's worth more than all the money in the world." After dinner, while the adults lingered over coffee and the girls played in the backyard, Denise found herself thinking about the woman she'd been 3 years ago. Scared, desperate, convinced that love alone wouldn't be enough to keep her family together. She'd been wrong about that last part. Love had been enough, but only because she'd learned that love sometimes meant accepting help, building community, and refusing to let pride stand in the way of progress. The phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. Dr. Carter's name appeared on the caller ID. Denise? I hope I'm not calling too late. I have some news I wanted to share with you personally. Dr. Carter had become more than just the girl's pediatrician over the years. She'd written letters of support during the custody battle, had connected Denise with resources for continuing education, and had become a trusted friend and mentor. I've been selected to head a new community health initiative, Dr. Carter continued, focused on supporting single mothers and their children. It's going to include everything from parenting classes to job training to mental health support. And I was wondering if you might be interested in helping me develop the program. Denise nearly dropped the phone. Me? But I don't have any training in social work or health care. You have something better. You have lived experience and you have the kind of insight that can only come from walking the path yourself. Plus, you've completed college courses in business administration, you've proven yourself as a program coordinator at the dental office, and you have connections throughout the community. It was true. In the 2 years since the custody battle, Denise had not only stabilized her family's situation but had continued building toward bigger goals. She'd taken evening classes at the community college, had been promoted to office manager at the dental practice, and had started volunteering with Rochelle's program to help other mothers navigate their own journeys toward independence. I would need to start part-time, Denise said, her mind already racing with possibilities. The girls are still my priority. Of course. And honestly, that's one of the things that makes you perfect for this role. You understand that being a good mother and having professional ambitions aren't mutually exclusive. After Dr. Carter hung up, Denise sat in her kitchen in her house, where her daughters were safe and happy and thriving, and marveled at how much had changed. Ruby appeared in the doorway, her face serious in the way that meant she'd been thinking about something important. Mama? Can I ask you something? Always, baby. Do you ever think about Grandma Beatrice? The question caught Denise off guard. They rarely talked about the custody battle anymore, and Beatrice had maintained her distance since losing in court. Sometimes. Why? I saw her at the grocery store yesterday with Miss Geneva. She looked sad and old. Denise felt an unexpected tug of sympathy. Beatrice was old, and she was alone in a way that went beyond simply living by herself. She had chosen bitterness over relationship, control over love, and had ended up with neither her granddaughters nor any hope of being part of their lives. Did she see you? Yeah. She smiled a little bit, but she didn't say anything. Miss Geneva said maybe we should pray for her. Mrs. Hayes would say that, Denise thought. Despite everything Beatrice had put them through, Mrs. Hayes believed in the power of forgiveness and second chances. What do you think? Denise asked. Ruby considered the question with the gravity she brought to all moral dilemmas. I think maybe she was wrong about us not being good enough because we're girls. But I also think maybe she was scared of losing the only family she had left, and she just didn't know the right way to be part of our family. The wisdom in her 11-year-old daughter's words took Denise's breath away. Ruby had somehow managed to see past the hurt and anger to understand that Beatrice's cruelty had come from a place of fear and loss. You know what I think? Denise said, pulling Ruby onto her lap the way she had when she was smaller. I think you and Pearl are going to grow up to be the kind of women who make the world a better place. Not because you're perfect, but because you understand that people are complicated and forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, but it does mean choosing love over bitterness. Does that mean we should try to talk to Grandma Beatrice? It means that when you're ready, if you want to try, I'll support you. But only when and if you want to, and only in a way that feels safe for our family. Ruby nodded, satisfied with this answer. Later that evening, after Mrs. Hayes and Rochelle and Monica had gone home, after the dishes were washed and the girls were tucked into their beds with stories and prayers and goodnight kisses, Denise stood in her backyard looking at the stars. Tomorrow she would call Dr. Carter and accept the position. Tomorrow she would start building something new, not just for her own family, but for all the families who were where she used to be, scared and struggling and convinced that love wouldn't be enough. But tonight, she simply stood in the cool air and listened to the sounds of her neighborhood settling into sleep. Somewhere in the house behind her, Pearl was probably already dreaming of baby birds and garden adventures. Ruby might still be awake, reading by flashlight under her covers, lost in whatever book had captured her imagination this week. They were safe. They were loved. They were growing into exactly the people they were meant to be, not in spite of being girls, but because they were fierce, intelligent, compassionate girls who knew their worth. And that, Denise thought, was more than enough. It was everything. The next morning brought news that would change everything in the most unexpected way. Denise was getting ready for work when the phone rang, Mrs. Hayes calling earlier than usual. "Turn on channel 7, she said without preamble. "Right now." Denise fumbled for the remote, confused by the urgency in Mrs. Hayes's voice. The local morning news appeared on screen, and she almost dropped the remote when she saw the headline, "Local Woman Endows Scholarship Fund for Single Mothers." The reporter was standing outside a bank downtown, speaking into the camera with the kind of excitement reserved for genuinely heartwarming stories. In an unprecedented act of community support, longtime Detroit resident Beatrice Thompson has established a $1 million scholarship fund specifically designed to help single mothers pursue higher education and job training. The Beatrice Thompson Foundation for Family Success will provide full funding for childcare, tuition, and living expenses for up to 50 women per year who are working to build better lives for themselves and their children. Denise sank onto the couch, staring at the screen in disbelief. The reporter continued, "Mrs. Thompson says the inspiration for the foundation came from watching other families in her community struggle with challenges that she realized she had never faced herself. She hopes the fund will help ensure that financial barriers never prevent devoted mothers from achieving their educational and career goals." The screen cut to an interview with Beatrice, who looked older than Denise remembered but somehow softer around the edges. "I've learned that supporting families means supporting mothers," Beatrice said, looking directly into the camera. "It means recognizing that the best thing we can do for children is help their parents succeed. I should have understood that sooner." Ruby appeared beside the couch, still in her pajamas, watching the news report with wide eyes. "Mama, is that Grandma Beatrice?" "Yes, baby. She's helping other mamas like you?" "It looks like it." They watched the rest of the segment in silence. When it ended, Ruby curled up next to Denise on the couch. Maybe Miss Geneva was right about praying for her. Denise hugged her daughter close, thinking about second chances and the mysterious ways that people sometimes find their way back to love. Maybe she was, baby. Maybe she was. The phone rang again, Mrs. Hayes, undoubtedly wanting to discuss this latest development. But before Denise could answer, Pearl came running into the living room with an announcement that made everything else fade into the background. "Mama, Ruby, the baby birds are hatching. Come see." They spent the morning in the garden, watching 3 tiny creatures emerge into the world with their mother hovering protectively nearby. It seemed like the perfect metaphor for everything they had built together: new life emerging from careful tending, protection offered without smothering, and the simple miracle of growth happening exactly as it was meant to. By afternoon, word had spread through their community about Beatrice's foundation. Dr. Carter called to say that several women from Rochelle's program had already inquired about applying. Rochelle herself stopped by with applications and the kind of excitement that meant she was already planning how to help as many women as possible take advantage of this opportunity. "You know what this means?" she said, spreading the application materials across Denise's kitchen table. "This means dozens of mothers every year are going to have the chance to build the kind of life you've built. This means children are going to grow up watching their mothers fight for something better instead of just accepting whatever circumstances they were born into." That evening, as Denise was putting the girls to bed, Ruby asked the question she'd been expecting all day. "Mama, do you think we should call Grandma Beatrice and say thank you?" Denise sat on the edge of Ruby's bed, thinking about forgiveness and second chances and the kind of courage it takes to admit you were wrong. "What do you think we should do?" "I think maybe we should write her a letter. Tell her that what she's doing is good, and that we're proud of her for helping other families. And if she wants to be part of our family again?" Ruby was quiet for a long moment, working through the complexity of the situation with the seriousness she brought to everything important. "I think we could try. But slow, like with the baby birds. We have to be careful and make sure everyone feels safe." Wise beyond her years, this daughter of hers. Denise kissed Ruby's forehead and turned off the light. "Sleep well, baby. Tomorrow we'll write that letter." But as she reached the doorway, Ruby's sleepy voice stopped her. "Mama? I'm glad we're girls. I'm glad we're exactly who we are." "Me too, baby. Me too." Outside, the mother bird was settling over her newly hatched babies, wings spread wide in protection and love. In the house, 2 daughters slept safely under their mother's watchful care. And somewhere across the city, a woman who had learned the difference between loving someone and trying to control them was working to make sure other mothers would never have to choose between their children and their dreams. It was exactly the kind of ending that proved love, in all its complicated forms, really could be enough.